Welcome everyone to Living Lives, which stands for the Learning Institute for Visionary Epistemologies in STEM and Interdisciplinary Studies. We'd like to appreciate your attendance today. We're so excited about our guest speaker, who is the Honorable Menah Pratt, coming from Virginia Tech. And again, welcome and thank you so much, Dr. Pratt, for giving this talk for us this afternoon, and for those of you who showed up, and I want to thank our staff, Lila, for helping to organize this event as well. I will be taking my face away, and our focus will be on Menah, Dr. Menah Pratt. And what we'll do, she's going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then afterwards we will have a facilitation of a Q&A. Okay, without any further ado, thank you again, and welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here today and to share a little bit about some recent thinking and scholarship that I'm working on, and look forward to our conversation afterwards. Some of this is going to be part storytelling and then part reflection on some theoretical, methodological, and praxis elements. In July 2019, I drove from Blacksburg, Virginia to a small, beautiful retreat center just outside of Nashville for a three-week sojourn. I was retreating from Virginia Tech and the daily work of diversity, equity, inclusion as the Vice President for Strategic Affairs and Diversity and Professor of Education. I had essentially worked almost nonstop for 3 years, trying to build a diversity program and create a strategic plan for the university. I was exhausted and in need of rest, and so I was sent by the universe to Penuel Ridge for rest, but also to undertake an assignment. Penuel Ridge is an interfaith and contemplative center that draws its name and inspiration from the story in Genesis where Jacob wrestled with God at a place called Penuel. Penuel Ridge sits on 135 acres of land with a lake, a meditation path, trails, a labyrinth, a fire pit, and a well. The well is a small circular straw and mud house with an altar in the middle for candles. It's a quiet space for reflection and prayer. Penuel Ridge also includes a large house with a main level living room, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, and a basement suite. I was assigned to the basement suite. Appropriately so. In my car as I drove there from Virginia Tech, I carried my assignment, boxes full of 45 years of journals that I had been writing in since I was 8 years old. Arriving at the retreat center, I met the host and owner of the property. After we exchanged pleasantries, she told me that 3 Brahmin cows had escaped from the ranch next door. She said that horseback riders would arrive in the morning to help round them up. She escorted me to my hideaway, the downstairs basement suite in the main house, with a bedroom with 4 beds, single beds, a sitting room, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. I unloaded all the boxes from the car and decided to go for a walk. I had been here many times in my life. It was a comfortable and familiar space that had been a retreat to me during many years of living in Nashville and going to school and working at Vanderbilt. I took a long walk on the nature trail, and as I was returning during sunset, lo and behold, the cows. 3 of them, majestic, calm, and powerful. They confirmed that I was where I was meant to be in order to do the work I needed to do. I was at Penuel because the universe had signaled to me that the time had come. The time had come for me to unearth hidden treasures. Because it was an assignment from the universe that I had accepted, I had to trust that she would show up to help and guide me. And she did. I knew that cows were considered spiritual and sacred symbols of strength. The appearance of the cows was consistent with the mission of the Penuel Ridge, to create a space to explore, quote, the journey inward to strengthen the journey outward. I would be journeying inward. The next morning, I began the journey. I compassionately and lovingly removed parts of my life in bits and pieces from the many boxes. Memories and moments of pain and gain, love and loss, joy and sorrow. The journals occupied 3 of the 4 beds. I labeled them with the years they included and laid them out chronologically. Over the course of 3 weeks, I spent hours each day transcribing the journals, praying, meditating, and walking, journeying inwardly and outwardly. After 3 weeks, I had fulfilled my assignment, or so I thought. I returned to Blacksburg with a very rough draft of a manuscript of my journey from Black girlhood to Black womanhood. In the early mornings and on weekends, I continued to work on the manuscript alone in my home in Blacksburg. One Saturday morning, I hit the proverbial brick wall. I just stared and stared at my computer and the edited papers in front of me filled with hand-scribbled notes. I was frozen. I couldn't seem to move. Suddenly and without warning, they started. The tears, lines and lines down my chin. The lines led to sobs, heaving, heart-wrenching cries. I was overwhelmed. I felt chaotic and confused. The manuscript was an unstructured, disorganized mess. What was happening? I realized that I was scared and unsure about how to write about myself outside of my sacred private journals. Although I know many Black women have written memoirs and autobiographies, I was struggling with the challenge of publicly writing about myself as a scholar. In particular, I felt angst about sharing the parts of myself that had been dismembered, disembodied, disemboweled, and discarded. In higher education, we are taught a formula for research and dissertations. The components, questions, data, theory, method, and findings are ingrained into our training to become scholars. We need to understand and master the existing literature. What does the literature review tell us about the scholarship in the field? How do we identify gaps and opportunities in the literature and then seek to close the gap with our knowledge and contribute to the field? What theories will we rely on? What methods, quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods will be used? What data will be used? I got stuck. I got stuck trying to find the research question for my life. I began to ask and attempt to answer a series of questions. What is my research project? How is my work different and compelling? What is my data? What methodologies will I use to analyze my data of my life? What theories will I use? Does my work speak to the canon, the existing body of scholarship? Who and what is the canon for my life writing? Could I try to challenge the traditional way of writing about one's life? Because I had been socialized to write for the academy and to write a certain way to be seen as a legitimate scholar, I was not quite sure how to undertake a manuscript that might bridge the academic and the non-academic space, a work that might sit in the middle of both worlds. I needed a framework that I could use to take the content from the journals from the private space to the public space. In attempting to create a framework, I found inspiration in Alice Walker's 1983 essay, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. Walker reminds us that as Black women, we are searching for belonging and our place and space in the white world as Black women scholars, writers, and artists. Our place and space can often be found in our gardens. In her mother's garden, Alice found, quote, what fed that muzzled and often mutilated but vibrant creative spirit that the Black woman has inherited that pops out in wild and unlikely places to this day. For Alice's mother, and maybe many generations of mothers, our gardens provide a space for our souls and spirits to be watered, cultivated, cared for, and loved. It's a space over which we have control in patient partnership with nature. It's a place of solace and peace in an otherwise confusing and chaotic world of racism, sexism, patriarchy, and pain. Coincidentally, I started gardening around the same time I was writing, paying homage to my mother, who also had a garden. I was trying to understand gardening as a metaphor for writing and tilling the soil of our souls. I wanted to reflect on what it means to plant and bury seeds, what it means to water and care for seeds and seedlings, and what it means to watch life emerge from death. I wanted to learn the lessons of nature, that some seeds grow and some die, that some plant flowers and others don't, that some plants flower and others don't. That sometimes we inadvertently pick flowers, mistaking them for herbs. That sometimes we pick pumpkins too soon when they are green, mistaking them for watermelon. I wanted to learn how to sort the wheat from the chaff and to understand how to separate weeds from wonders. Writing a book manuscript from personal journals like gardening requires tilling our spiritual soil that is deep, dark, and buried with seeds that are yearning to be birthed. Writing like gardening requires giving birth to seeds and creating new life from that which has been suppressed, repressed, depressed, pressed down, and buried. To unearth the authentic self and spirit requires a tending and cultivating process with particular and carefully selected gardening tools: sickles, scythes, spades, shovels, trowels, shears, hoses, and maybe even a little stool to sit on for a respite. If we are not careful as we unearth and reveal what is buried, we can cause damage and destroy the root and the delicate and rich substance beneath the ground, the fruit and the flower. I realized that to unearth myself from 45 years of journals, I was going to need a new transdisciplinary tool. This talk offers a new tool for revolutionary revelation writing, because as a Black woman, I needed a unique tool to unearth and share a unique life journey. Recognizing that, quote, many women live desert lives, very small on the surface and enormous underground, a quote from Estes, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, from Women Who Run with Wolves. I realized that I needed a tool to exhume my underground and invisible life, documented in years of journals. I needed to represent the identity I claimed in my first book, written in 2010, Critical Race Feminism and Education, a Social Justice Model. In the introduction I wrote, I see myself as part of a long line of revolutionary Black feminist scholar activists. As part of writing my life journey, I asked myself, what does it mean to be a revolutionary Black feminist scholar activist? Realizing that revolution and its Latin-based roots means to revolve and turn around, I wanted to offer a tool for encouraging the world to turn and face us as Black women and girls, face to face, eye to eye. Revolutionary revelation writing requires revealing parts of ourselves to the world that may have been hidden, parts that we have had to hide to survive. It requires unveiling the mask that Paul Laurence Dunbar in 1895 so eloquently describes, this mask that hides our tears and sighs, our torn and bleeding hearts, and our cries to Christ from our tortured souls. This revelation and mask pulling process requires a unique form of writing that is flexible, fluid, empowering, creative, sensitive, and personal. It must be malleable to handle the power and pain of Black women. Our journeys and lives as Black women and girls are not neat, formal, and proper. And so we need a tool that acknowledges and accommodates mess and chaos, uncertainty, and emotion. It must facilitate not only our workings out, our struggles, wrestlings, and wranglings with the material, but also in our hearts and spirits and souls. It has to be able to facilitate the shattering of silence and the emergence of voice. Like a seed, it has to allow what is buried and hidden to come forth. And often what is hidden for women is our wild woman. The wild woman that Clarissa Estes Pinkola speaks about, writes about, is part of our psyches as women. She says that this wild nature carries everything a woman needs to be and know. She carries the medicine for all things. She carries stories and dreams and words and songs and signs and symbols. She is both vehicle and destination. Because our wild woman is the source of our power as women, this power source has often been severed and buried in patriarchal dominated societies. It is this seed of ourselves that we must cultivate in our own spiritual gardens. Excavating our Black wild woman within is complicated work, requiring a unique and multi-layered approach. The integration of theory, method, and praxis to reflect the borderless and boundaryless approach required for this new scholarship. It's a tool for the excavation of the spiritual garden of Black women's lives. A Black wild womanist autoethnography is an integration of theory, method, and praxis. As part of a Black feminist womanist praxis research paradigm, it uses Black women's autobiography, critical praxis, autoethnography as methodological tools. And it integrates theoretical constructs from Black feminism, Black womanism, Black girlhood studies, womanist theology, and the wild woman archetype to engage in the performance praxis of revolutionary revelation writing, liberation, and emancipation. Using Black women's autobiography, autoethnography, counter-storytelling, and Black girl cartography as methodological tools, it also integrates theoretical constructs from Black feminism, girlhood studies, womanist theology. So it's a tool that supports the collaboration of theories and practices that can support the radical scholarship of challenging powerful systems. The power of autoethnography as a qualitative research methodology lies in its ability to explore complex issues and dynamics from a multifaceted lens, informed by both the personal and the political. Autoethnographies are also about more than just an individual experience, but always contextualize into a larger socio-political culture that creates the opportunity for activism, resistance, and justice. Autoethnography, including critical praxis autoethnography, creates a space for visibility, recognition, and belonging, for documenting silencing and othering, and for addressing the unequal distribution and use of power and privilege. Critical praxis autoethnography blends theory, method, and praxis by facilitating the use of theory and action to challenge domination and oppression. Because domination and oppression often begin in our childhoods, Black girlhood studies as an interdisciplinary field is a critical component of a Black wild womanist autoethnography. Black girlhood studies has a commitment to, quote, understanding the experiences of Black girls and Black girlhood through both theoretical and methodological approaches that expand and cross boundaries with innovative approaches, documentation, and analysis. One of those approaches is Black girl cartography. Black girl cartographers are researchers, scholars, advocates, and individuals who self-identify as a Black girl and who have a deep concern for Black girls' health, lives, well-being, and ways of being, according to Butler. A Black girl autoethnographic cartographer maps her life as a journey through paths with turning points, mountains, valleys, and definitive moments. Given the almost inseparable continuum from girlhood to womanhood, Hill offers the word Black girl woman without any spaces to challenge the traditional separation of race, gender, and generation by recognizing the integrated aspects of Black girlhood and Black womanhood. It is this continuum that mandates the interrogation of the complex experiences of Black girls and Black women through both a feminist and a woman.
Did she freeze up on everyone?
Yeah, she's freezing for me.
Okay,
Yeah.
hopefully she'll come back to us. In the meantime, I will pause the recording until she gets back. Okay, I believe, Menah, are you back now? Menah? Okay, you're back. Okay, please.
Okay. It disappeared, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, womanist thought. A Black wild womanist autoethnography framework is informed by Alice Walker's 1983 definition of womanist and her womanist prose. Just give me a minute here. In that definition, she defines womanist as from womanish, the opposite of girlish. A Black feminist or feminist of color. It's from the Black folk expression of mothers to female children. You act in womanish, like a woman, referring to outrageous, audacious, courageous, or willful behavior, wanting to know more and in greater depth than is considered good for one. Interested in grown-up doings, acting grown-up, being grown-up, interchangeable with another Black folk expression, you trying to be grown. Responsible, in charge, serious. The second definition of womanist is a woman who loves other women, sexually and or non-sexually, appreciates and prefers women's culture, women's emotional flexibility, and women's strength. Sometimes loves individual men, sexually and or non-sexually, committed to survival and wholeness of entire people, male and female, not a separatist, except periodically for help. Traditionally universalist, as in, Mama, why are we brown, pink, and yellow, and our cousins are white, beige, and Black? Answer, well, you know, the colored race is just like a flower garden with every flower, color flower represented. Traditionally capable, as in, Mom, I'm walking to Canada, I'm taking you and a bunch of other slaves with me. Reply, it wouldn't be the first time. The third definition of womanist is loves music, loves dance, loves the moon, loves the spirit, loves love and food and roundness, loves struggle, loves the folk, loves herself, regardless. The fourth definition is womanist, is to feminist, as purple is to lavender. There was a long and complicated history associated with the relationship between feminism and womanism. Although there's a realization that they are distinctive in their disciplinary roots, purposes, interrogations of power, social structures, and systems of oppression, both Black feminist thought and womanist thought share a common focus on Black women's self-definition, self-determination, and liberation in the context of race, class, and gender oppression. As such, both are equally valuable as tools for understanding Black women's and girls' lives. Not to conflate the two theories, Lindsay Dennis encourages Black feminist, womanist researchers to draw from both Black feminist thought and womanist thought in order to develop a comprehensive understanding of Black girlhood, noting that research about African American girls is both an intellectual and spiritual pursuit of purpose. The role of spirituality then leads to another important concept in a Black wild womanist autoethnographic framework, womanist theology. In an undated journal entry, I wrote, "Dear God, I am profoundly convinced of the magnificent misinterpretation of your word, often well-intentioned, but too literal, ill-informed, personal, and influenced by experiences. These ideas of Satan, sin, and fear, which pervade interpretations of the word, are so profound and controlling. Who can feel good when these are governing principles? Satan is chasing you. You are evil. You have sinned. Be afraid of God. How can we juxtapose a concept of a loving, caring, and beautiful God in the midst of those ideas? How can I write something to transform our society's ideas about God?" In this search for God as a Black woman in America, it is this search for God as a Black woman in America that situates the concept of womanist theology. When Katie Geneva Cannon in 1985 introduced the concept of womanist theology at the American Academy of Religion conference in 1995, she fainted. Her nerves were on edge as she sought to contribute to the field that never wanted to acknowledge her existence. As women of color academics, we live our lives on the verge of fainting, or at the very least, we are lightheaded, nervous, uncertain, and anxious. We are unsure about not only our presence and place of belonging in the academy, but also about what and how our contribution to the academy will be received. Yet Cannon and two other Black Union Theological Seminary doctoral students, Jacqueline Grant and Dolores Williams, inspired by Alice Walker, excavated a world of spirituality that existed, quote, at Black women's kitchen tables, on front porches, in beauty shops, in women's clubs, in the varieties of Black women's prayer closets, and in various, quote unquote, women's spaces within the Black church. Thurman noted that Black women have created their own sacred spaces. She said, in these spaces, as Black women came to know the love, mercy, and justice of God for themselves, they forged a theology that boldly affirms that Black women's lives are significant and valuable, not only to God, but also to the church and the world. In the social, political, and religious realms that so often erased Black women's experiences, Black women of faith had the courage to believe and assert, I am here, I am fully human, I am fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God. As womanist theology has evolved over the years through the scholarship of many Black women scholars and warriors, it has become an increasingly complex and nuanced field. At its core, womanist theology focuses on the liberation, flourishing, self-love, and maintenance of the hope and faith of Black women in spite of our intersecting race, class, and gender oppression. Theological womanism is, quote, a theology that affirms the significance of Black women's God talk, survival, and flourishing as part of the Christian journey experience, according to Thurman. The work of womanist theology is Black women doing the work our souls must have and making a way out of no way. My mom used that phrase, making a way out of no way. It was a phrase her mom used. It's a phrase that many Black women have used as a statement of faith that has been passed down through generations. It's a statement and proclamation of hope and faith when seemingly nothing, no one, and no way is visible or possible. This steadfast, unwavering belief and willingness to step out on the word of God alone was often associated with women known as prayer warriors. Since Black women are required to be warriors, we need a conceptual framework that acknowledges our warrior journey. The wild woman archetype is another critical concept in a Black wild womanist autoethnographic framework. Carissa Pinkola Estes, in her marvelous work, Women Who Run with the Wolves, reveals ancient secrets and hidden knowledge about the divine feminine and the power of women. Using Indigenous stories, she reminds us of the importance of gathering our bones, the skeleton bones of our lives, and remaking them into a wild woman with flesh, spirit, soul, and body. She invites us to interrogate what was buried in our lives and encourages us to remake and refashion ourselves from the pieces and bones that have been scattered and whitened. The wild woman is part of our psyches as women. The wild nature, according to her, carries everything, as I said earlier, a woman needs to know and be, carries the medicine for all things. Our lives as women are about the search for our wild woman. We want to find her, free her, love her, cherish her, exalt her, and celebrate her. Estes reminds us, today, the old one inside you is collecting bones. What is she remaking? She is the soul self, the builder of the soul home. She makes and remakes by hand the soul. What is she making for you? A wild woman journey is a remaking, a collecting, a gathering, a breathing, a creating, and a reconstruction. Carissa encourages us to ask, what are the buried bones of my life? She tells and admonishes us to go gather the bones. This bone gathering exercise is the work of women who are courageous enough to recover and rediscover their wild woman, that part of our psyche that has been buried and must be excavated. When we start this journey, we must ask what was killed in our lives. What dreams, goals, and hopes have we lost? Where were they buried? In what cellar, cave, or dungeon? How, when, and by whom was our wild woman silenced? The ultimate goal of the journey is the retrieval of the wild woman and her return from exile. This journey of the return includes marking the deaths, the places where she had died. We are compelled to mark where pieces of ourselves died, where crosses must be placed, where a life must be remembered and blessed. We must place markers of our suffering, for they are also markers of transformation, like Jesus on the cross, simultaneously suffering, but also transforming the world. Estes uses the ancient indigenous tale, The Handless Maiden, and the maiden's initiation in the underground forest to illustrate the journeys of our spirits and psyches in the underground world of female knowledge. It's about women discovering and recovering our original power through a 7-stage initiation. These 7 stages reflect the stages of a woman's initiation to find her wild woman. Each stage is complex, nuanced, and symbolic of our spirit's journey. The Handless Maiden represents an allegory about the development of endurance, resistance, and grit in the pursuit of the divine feminine knowledge. At the completion of the 7 stages, the wild woman psyche is no longer exiled and buried. She is a warrior, strong, resilient, confident, whole, and ready to be a warrior for herself and other women. This wild woman archetype provides the connective tissue for a Black wild womanist autoethnographic framework. A Black wild womanist autoethnography can be a revolutionary tool for Black women scholars who are writing about their life journeys. I use this tool to excavate my own garden of journals. In seeing my journals as data and as the archive, I use an autoethnographic, archaeological, cartographic approach informed by theoretical concepts associated with womenism, feminism, womanist theology, Black girlhood studies, and the wild woman archetype to breathe new life into the metaphorically dead bones and words in my journals. Through the praxis of writing, buried experiences that have been submerged in 45 years of journals, diaries, and letters to love, beginning at the age of 8, were brought to life. The praxis of writing about my journey from Black girlhood to Black womanhood became a symbolic act of birth and creation. This concept of birthing a story and a life is consistent with African American spiritual autobiographies, spirit narratives, and slave narratives, where literary spaces can be seen as the place where one fashions one's own freedom. Through writing, elements of my essence that had been silenced as part of the Black girlhood womanhood journey were liberated. The praxis of writing and revolution led to an exhumation. Pieces of my spirit that had been buried like a seed were watered and nourished. And the watering and writing helped my words to emerge from an underground life to an above ground life, like a flower, ready to blossom and bloom. The writing revealed and unearthed my wild woman. I found God in myself and I loved her fiercely. Writing was a powerful tool for liberation, providing me with the agency and ability to control and manage my own life story and experiences. Ultimately, writing enabled me to assume the roles of performer, playwright, poet, storyteller, and critic, quote, committed to changing the world one word, one performance at a time. The objective of a Black wild womanist autoethnography is to offer a strategy for revolutionary revelation writing, and it's crafted to specifically support removing the veil for Black women and Black girls in their life journey in America. This concept applied to Black women can also perhaps be applied to other areas of scholarship, such as Chicana, Latina feminist studies, Asian American feminist studies, and indigenous feminist studies. The scholarship is uniquely transdisciplinary, and outside of the traditional academic realm, it requires journals and presses that will be able to understand and support this type of revolutionary revelation writing. My own journey to publication of the manuscript was filled with denials and rejections from agents and presses, with over 80 rejections in the course of 1 year from 2020 to 2021. It was work that was so unfamiliar to the publishing world that agents often told me that they did not know what to do with it. Their feedback included comments that it was not the perfect fit or the right fit for their list, that I needed an agent with knowledge of forward-thinking editors, that, quote, the project reaches too far outside of my wheelhouse, that, quote, there is no doubt your work is important and we appreciate your ability to synthesize and integrate wide knowledge into an accessible and readable form, but we are looking for projects that are written in a more traditional literary style. One agent summed it up well. She said, quote, you have an interesting and powerful story to tell, and there's a lot to like about your approach. But in the end, I'm afraid I didn't come away quite fully convinced this was something I'd be able to represent successfully. After being rejected by agents, I thought I would try academic presses. Striking out again, they suggested that I send my work to trade presses. Quote, this sounds like a great project, but I suspect it would be better served by a trade house. End quote, you surely need a trade publisher for this work, not a university press. Yet many trade presses would not even allow me to submit the work without an agent. One agent, while rejecting my work, indicated that she would give the book to anyone she knew. She said, this part of your pitch really hits the nail on who your audience is too. And I would give this book to anyone I know. So this was part of my pitch. I said, this book is for anyone who wants to understand the experiences of girls as they seek to become wild women, women who are fierce and fearless, women who are warriors for themselves and others, women who are committed to cultivating and excavating their own spiritual garden and tilling their spiritual souls to blossom and bloom, and women who want to move from invisible underground lives to above ground lives of impact and influence by reclaiming their original power and role of women in the world. It's a guide for parents of daughters, girls, women, and wives, husbands, partners, and lovers of women. It's for readers and writers who want to push the boundaries of traditional storytelling and memoir. 2 years after the manuscript was complete and after multiple rejections and working with an editor on revisions, the universe sent me the ideal press. She Writes Press is a female-owned hybrid publishing company dedicated to publishing the works of women writers. The manuscript is tentatively titled Black Wild Girl, a writer's journey to take back her superpower. It's a story of a little black girl, Black Wild Girl, who knew she was a queen. And in her innocence, she shared her knowledge too soon. The world dethroned her, burying her spirit, expecting to asphyxiate her. But the world didn't know that she was a seed, germinating underground in the womb and bowels of the soil, the seed strangely, simultaneously suffocating and being nourished by nutrients hidden within the composting decay. Drinking from dewdrops, snatching heat from sunlight, shattering the seed coat, she began to grow roots. With a fierce, fiery, and feisty determination, she pushed through the muck and mire, sprouting. Rising up, she stuck her tongue out to taste the rain, her arms like leaves outstretched, her breasts like stems boldly bearing themselves, her nipples like flowers at attention. With a spine strong enough to withstand the wiles of the weeds and the winds of the world, she swayed unassuaged in the glorious air of her reclaimed throne. Regal, revolutionary, resurrected, and refusing to be denied her rightful role in destiny as a Black wild womanist, she blossoms and blooms, radiating rays of love and joy into a world in need of her presence and power. It's written in a format like a play, in terms of 4 acts, with stages and scenes. But ultimately, this work is about revolution, revelation, and reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And I think it's kind of invigorated me because I've been called a wild woman sometimes. So I think we're often described as wild women when we dare to speak up and be ourselves and try to find our place in the world. I'd like to open it up now for questions, comments. This is a time to engage in conversation. That's why we deliberately decided not to do a webinar. We really wanted to show everybody and give everybody an opportunity to talk about this amazing work. And Michelle, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I just first wanted to say thank you. This was exactly what I was hoping to get when I signed up for this. So great, thank you. To your piece about like having a hard time figuring out where to publish the thing, right? Or rather them not having a desire to take a risk to publish your work. I've found like scholastically that often it's the like digital presses that have been more open to doing less traditional things. In my discipline, like in writing studies, there's, fairly well regarded presses that are more interested in publishing things that are different, but they always host articles, right? They're not books. And I think that like our ongoing challenge in both the academy and like people that are often writing things that are for the public and trying to do both is going to be, the problem we've had forever in this country, right? Of like needing to get more people there and also needing to make our own spaces and somehow convince the powers that be that those spaces matter as much as the traditional spaces they're used to recognizing. I feel like that's the piece that I like continue to like mentally wrestle with, I guess, because it's the issue of like, we're going to write the things and they're going to be good because that's what we do, right? But your piece about like revealing to the world the things that sometimes they don't want to look at, that we had to hide because they are in fact were the ones that made it not safe for us to show those things. Like I feel like that's the piece that's still going to be deeply challenging. But I love like the framework that you gave for the work that you are doing. And it also gave me a lot of like very helpful key terms to be using to then like go about doing more research and figuring out like, oh, who's doing this methodology, who's doing that, so I can actually like see examples of the terms that you're using. So overall, just like thanks so much. And I just kind of wanted to put out there the question of like, does anybody else know of like places where people are publishing more daring things?
Yeah, I appreciate, thanks for your comments. This issue of the academic publishing world is a very, very complex issue because, to get tenure, we have to publish. And some disciplines, it's particular A journals. And so they already constrain from a disciplinary standpoint where you can publish and what type of scholarship those journals want. And some disciplines, it's only journals, right? In other disciplines, it's a book. And so, the publishers and presses are very narrowly tailored into particular disciplinary expertise. And when I wrote my first book, it was on critical race, feminism, and education, a social justice model. And it combined law, because I have a law degree and a PhD in sociology. And so I was looking at the integration of both of those disciplines with a particular case study. So it was developing a new transdisciplinary tool that combined law and sociology to examine issues of race, gender, and social justice, and class and Black nationalism and white women sexism. And I also couldn't find a press until I finally connected with a woman at the University of Illinois who was the editor of a particular series in one of the presses. And she said, I will help you. And so each time that I've gotten published, it's been because a woman of color has said, okay, I've got this unique position at this particular point in time where I can help support and advance your scholarship through my role as an editor. When I published through sort of my subsequent books, there was again a Black woman, it was Black Studies and Critical Thinking series through Peter Lang that no longer exists. One of the Black women editors passed away and the other moved on. But that series was like, okay, we're committed and dedicated to publishing the work of Black women or Black scholars in this disciplinary field. And they were very open to a wide range of work. But yes, I was surprised. I mean, and humbled by the challenge of, okay, where can I find will I be able to find a press to, and how do I remove the academic side if I want to do a trade press, or add the academic side if I want to do an academic press, and trying to balance that was a real challenge.
Are there any other questions out there? I know I have a question, and maybe, so what do you feel like the causes of these kind of rejections, right? In terms of, because this is about epistemologies, do you think that has something to do with it? Or do you think there are other factors that's influencing that?
I feel like at the trade press level, there are not many Black publishers, Black agents. And I think a lot of that world is not, even after George Floyd and with, Black voices matter, Black lives matter, we want to put more out there from the Black perspective. I'm not sure that they really wanted that. I think they said that, and that was sort of the politically correct thing to say, but I'm not convinced they really wanted as a press to own that type of political, social discourse in the work that they put out. And I think academic presses are so disciplinary bound that, and the editors of those presses or particular, the editors of particular series, it's very narrow disciplinarily. And so, it's like, this doesn't fit. I mean, this issue of fit, we hear this in interviews, right? This person's not a good fit. But I think it's, who fits? And this, deference to the traditional and the familiar. So when something is not traditional and not familiar and stretches boundaries and crosses boundaries, it clearly doesn't fit. And I think you have to have courageous and visionary people who are willing to say, yes, this contributes to the field in a unique and different way. And I'm just not sure that we always, the people in power who are controlling what gets out there. So, I think a lot of people try to go with self-publishing. This is a hybrid press. It's my first time. I'm sort of learning through the process. But people are like, I'm just going to self-publish, but that doesn't help you in the academy. Not that I need to publish in traditional presses as a tenured full professor, but you still want to feel you're contributing to the field and the knowledge in the field. And if you publish with a hybrid press or outside of the traditional fields, will your work get noticed and recognized and be, acknowledged?
Okay, thank you. I think that's a really good point. What does it mean to be noticed and recognized, right? And who is the audience? Who are we really trying to get our voices to? Are we trying to give our voices or lend our voices or have people at least hear our voices that are like ourselves? Or are we casting a wide audience? So who's our audience for this type of work?
Yeah, I think for me, the audience, one audience is women of color. For us to undertake that work of bringing out our wild woman and celebrating and honoring and unearthing her. But it's also for the larger majority population to understand that we have important things to say and to hear us, that we belong in all spaces, not just in spaces of people of color. We belong in all of society. And for our words and our research and our thoughts to be part of that larger community, I think is really important. All
right, thank you. We have Raquel Pacheco and then Waverly Duck. So after Raquel ask her question and Menah will respond, and then we'll have Waverly Duck to actually raise the question and respond. Yes, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. This was really, really what I needed today myself. So thank you for sharing your work. So I have two questions. The first is, how did you make this count for your professional career? And the second one is, I know you mentioned that this could be appropriate for Indigenous feminisms, women of color feminisms. And I recently was working on an article where I was drawing on Hortense Spiller's work on gendering. And I was trying to apply it to a case of an Indigenous woman in Mexico, and it got a little bit of pushback, saying like you can't really just transplant that, from some of the reviewers for this particular work. And I mean, I think it was a good point. Like, I can't just transplant, right? Like, just draw a connection without there being some sort of contextualization and a conversation about on what grounds am I doing that work. So I don't know if you had any idea of how you would like your work to be, applied and placed into conversation with these other types of like womanisms and feminisms and
Yeah. Okay. So the first question, so I'm a tenured full professor. So I don't have to have someone count it, which I feel blessed by reaching that status of not having to worry about it counting. Because if I had to worry about it counting, I would still have to continue to push to try to find an academic press, because that's what counts in the academy. So I would have to continue to push and restructure the work in different ways to try to fit within that space that the academy requires. So I would be trying to conform to, the boundaries that are set. And not that I don't think I could have found one, but I hadn't found one by the time I finally found sort of the hybrid press, She Writes Press. And so I would have just had to, rethink. I mean, I recently submitted this presentation for an article in a journal, because what I did is I had this whole theoretical lens at the beginning of the work. And then I had the analysis of the data through that lens. So I had the framework, and it's like, okay, here's the data, and I'm going to push this data through this framework. But in trying to, because I thought that's academic, right? That's the theory, the method, and the praxis. And then when I decided, okay, let me focus on sort of the broader non-academic per se audience, I took out this theoretical framework and I submitted it for an article, because I felt like I want this theoretical framework in the academic space. And so now I'm trying to blend both spaces. So I'm trying to get this article published from the academic side, and then I'm trying to do the book from sort of the trade side. And then I guess I would say, I think it's not easy translating. So I'm talking about a Black wild womanist autoethnographic framework, right? So I'm specifically talking about the experiences of African-American women and girls. So there's Black girlhood to Black womanhood, and womanist theology, Black women's, ways of being and doing. But I think that when I've looked at different feminisms, so Indigenous, and it draws on, Women Who Run with Wolves is really an Indigenous. It's about Indigenous stories and experiences of Indigenous women. And so I applied that as a wild womanist framework to my life journey as an African-American. So I did sort of usurp that framework of a handless maiden story, because it had these 7 initiation stages. I sort of repurposed it into 12 stages to fit my own journey a little bit better. So I do think that we can acknowledge reimagine as it might fit some cultural differences or background and experiential differences. I think there are similarities in just being women and people of color and the oppression we face. And so to the extent that there are tools and methodologies that look at issues of race, class, gender, identity, that we can use those and filter them through an Indigenous lens or through an Asian American lens or a Latinx lens and sort of build on that. So I do hope that this work lends itself, at least maybe the article lends itself to allowing other scholars to think about, okay, from my own cultural background, ethnicity, how can I use some of these tools, right? I mean, Black girl cartography and seeing our lives and mapping our lives, that concept of cartography is not limited to Black girls, right? So a cartographic approach can be used by anyone. So I think there's elements and pieces of the theories and methodologies that can translate across a Black girl, Black woman lens.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Waverly, please.
Hi, so I have two questions, but I want to first say thank you so much for this talk. And I think a part of my first question that I'm going to bury in this compliment is why there's a need, and my question is why there's a need of innovative ways of thinking about the experience of Black women and girls. And a part of this question, I teach qualitative methods, I teach ethnography. I'm an ethnographer myself, and the lack of ethnographic text that captures the lived experience of Black women and girls is so missing and so needed that there's that as a subject. And I speculate that it's sort of situated in anti-Blackness. But as I was watching you, and what I was really excited and sort of humbled and grateful was watching in real time what I speculate a lot of Black women who were ethnographers who really tried to push the envelope and have us think about something much more broader and wider that created a space for innovation. So whether it's like Catherine Dunham or Zora Neale Hurston, or as someone brought up Spillers and her ability to interrogate language, I was wondering if you could talk about why, and even more contemporary people like Patricia Hill Collins, and as these scholars have to come up with innovative ways of capturing one's lived experience, because there's no accounting of it within a discipline, that you can't actually capture that experience within one discipline. So I was wondering if you could talk about that legacy of why, the innovation behind your thinking for this, but also the significance of doing this important work. The next question is, and it's, and I don't know how to sort of ask this, but is there a way, or can you, and I think we both share that we're both, come out of a sociology background, is there a way to capture the lived experience of any people, but particularly Black people within a discipline, to tell a complete story that's recognizable? So I'll leave it at that. The innovation, and then what is required to tell that story, and even responding to sort of the anti-Blackness, and particularly the lack of scholarship on women and girls, Black women and girls.
Yeah. I mean, the innovation I find to be an interesting lens, because I have the benefit of scholarship of my disciplinary training. So I was trained, went to University of Iowa, and I majored as an undergrad in literary studies. And I minored in African American studies and philosophy. So as an undergrad, I got this interdisciplinary way of thinking philosophically, which was really important. And then I was learning African American history. Now, the African American experience was basically through the literary program, right? But I'm learning about African American literature, African American history. And then I stayed on to get a master's degree because I fell in love with William Faulkner and thinking about how he looked and portrayed African Americans. And I wanted to understand one particular novel of his, which was Absalom, Absalom. So I stayed at Iowa to do this master's thesis on Absalom, Absalom, and then I sort of got discouraged by the critical lens that's used in literary studies. So the critiquing nature of literature. So I thought, okay, now how can I can't stay in the literary field. What am I going to go into? And then I chose sociology and law. But then in that training, I was fortunate to be able to sit in both a legal mindset and sit in law school and do what law school does, which is train you somewhat Socratically to ask questions and to think about answers, but you're reading all this case law. And then I would go to sociology and I would read these other types of work that was not anything like law school text. But because these disciplines were so different, I wanted to integrate them. So I kept looking for topics that would integrate both disciplines. So juvenile justice, for example, okay, it's law, sociology. But that wasn't really, criminal justice does both, but that really wasn't what I wanted to explore. So I landed on education and intersections of education and sociology with race, class, and gender, and then affirmative action, civil rights, law, and the education space. So I think a discipline like education is sort of interdisciplinary in and of itself. So some disciplines lend themselves a little bit more to interdisciplinary creative thinking and spaces. I've spent a lot of time lately trying to read more and unearth more works by Black women and girls. And they're out there, but like Bell Hooks has an amazing book on Black girlhood. It was just a phenomenal book. And there's more works now coming out about the Black girlhood experience. And I'm really excited about that work and scholarship. So I think it's an emerging field where more women are writing. And the thing is, these works are really kind of painful. And so I think the other challenge is women just being courageous enough to write about pain points and the challenges of being a Black girl and being a Black woman. And so I think it's this both and. More women have to feel like they can write it, that there's presses and spaces to become tenured in the academy for their work. My mother was a full professor. And I wrote a book about her called From Cotton Picking to College Professor, Lessons about Race, Class, and Gender in America. And she was one of the first women to become a full professor in the 1970s, okay, when Black women were less than 1% of all full professors. She was in the field of social work, okay, but one of her major contributions to social work is through social work, she undertook a project that was called the Bloomington Normal Black History Project, where she conducted oral interviews of almost 100 elderly African Americans to understand and document their experiences in Bloomington Normal, Illinois, where she lived, as African Americans. And so in that work, she was capturing the lived experiences of it through as a social work professor. Now the Bloomington Normal Black History Project was co-led with a faculty member in English. And so this opportunity for collaboration, interdisciplinary work, but I think scholars could be innovative because she wanted social work students to understand the importance of empowerment and empowering the voices of elderly African Americans who are typically discarded and dismissed in society, and lifting up their experiences of dealing with issues of racism in particular and sexism. So I think that's another example of a discipline outside of your traditional disciplines or understanding of that discipline that could capture the lived experiences of African American women and girls. I mean, certainly education is another space, sociology, psychology, and I think it's, again, having enough scholars in those spaces, scholars who are willing and interested in pushing, because not all scholars of color want to do research on scholars of color issues. And I just want to, contribute to the traditional canon. And I think we also have to honor and respect that. But then it goes to, if not us, then who? But you also have these other scholars who are majority scholars who are writing and interviewing and contributing. And I think that becomes an interesting conversation. How do you understand and accept, validate, critique that contribution of majority scholars to, the work of diversity, issues of race, class, and gender? So yeah, those are some very good and thoughtful questions, not easy answers to them, because, in the first book, I spent a lot of time thinking about the hegemonic nature of disciplines, because disciplines perpetuate themselves. They're designed to perpetuate and continue a certain way of thought. And they've structured themselves through disciplinary associations, through the tenure process, through the structure of academic departments to perpetuate the discipline, the ways of thinking, the theory, through the academic journals. I mean, you look at the whole process and it's designed to perpetuate a certain lens. And so how do scholars disrupt that when it's structured that way? And, I think Patricia Hill Collins in her concept of power domains is a very helpful lens on much of this work, right? So you've got the hegemonic, you've got the disciplinary, structural, interpersonal domains, and how they work together to continue to perpetuate systems of oppression, but that they can also be sites of activism. And so how do we try to reimagine? I feel like that's what I was trying to do in my work, in a way, is reimagine that hegemonic domain, these ways of seeing the world and talking about experiences, to say maybe we can challenge it a little bit and shift and bring in multiple lenses, because a Black girl experience can't just be looked at through one framework. You're welcome.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We have about 15 more minutes. We'd love to engage the others that are on this call. I'm sure you are thinking this is a topic that definitely you have an opinion about, and we'd love to hear from someone else in the audience. Thank you very much, Olga. Thank you.
Sorry,
Please.
hi. I can ask a question now. Hello, Dr. Pratt. Thank you so much for the talk. I really love the perspective that you have on these hegemonic domains that perpetuate systems of oppression, as also offering as a possibility of shifting that perspective and bringing in activism and becoming sites where we can challenge these systems of oppression in conversations. And to me, that kind of connects with mentorship and sort of the conversations that we can have with graduate students, especially, and sort of the guidance that we can offer graduate students. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about mentorship in these spaces and what that looks like, and how we can engage in this process of shifting perspectives.
I think mentorship of graduate students is a really complicated responsibility because, this, and it's, the classes are one thing, right? Take your classes, but I think you can't challenge something you don't understand. So we have to understand the canon. We have to understand the basics of a discipline, the building blocks of a disciplinary area, whatever they are. And once we understand them, then we can begin to critique and stretch and try to reshape. But oftentimes, ill-informed but passionate graduate students want to just, well, no, why are we reading? Blah, blah, blah. No, we shouldn't. It's like, that's okay to be passionate, but understand a thing. because the power of being able to change is based on the expertise that you have gained. So if you can understand an area well, even if you disagree with what people are saying, but whatever the canon is, understand it. Because then when you seek to challenge and dismantle it, you will have credibility. But if you don't understand it and you just want to challenge it, you're ineffective. So I think it's one, encouraging students to become masters of the discipline, to master the area. And then using their mastery, plus their creativity, their visionary ideas, and the unique backgrounds that they might bring to push the boundaries. It's a complicated thing because you're encouraging them to push boundaries in a space that doesn't allow that. That's not receptive, often is not receptive. And so you have to nuance. I mean, somebody told me today that I was sneaky, and I said, no, I'm strategic. Because we have to think really, okay, how can you say a thing? How can you talk about a thing? How can you, understand how a system operates, then to use it as a site of activism. And I think that's really important. So when I've done in my work, so I lead diversity, equity, and inclusion at Virginia Tech. And I have been so thoughtful about all the domains. So when I think about, okay, what diversity initiative am I going to push for? I will process that initiative through the domains. I was like, okay, is this a hegemonic domain? Do I need to be changing ideologies? That's really hard. That's to change people's ideologies and ways of thought it's very difficult. Okay. So that might be harder. Structures. I mean, you're not going to change the way a department operates necessarily, right? Disciplinary domain, policies and procedures. People do that all the time. They go through governance, they push something through. There's, that's a space for that. The interpersonal, it's people, it's relationships with people, right? And any activism has to start with engagement, with conversations with people. And so when you understand the work of relationship building, then you invest time in it and say, okay, and I tell early career faculty, undertake an archaeological assessment of your department. do a 30-minute coffee with people and sort of get a sense of, are they an ally, an obstacle, agnostic towards you? Can you collaborate with them and sort of write it up and look at it? It's like, who are these people that I'm interacting with? Who can I work with? And so I don't think we're strategic enough in how we engage in the academy to be able to leverage resources, to be able to nuance, to push for change, to understand that we're not going to win everything. So we can't fight all the time. We can't fight everything. Choosing our battles. And some of that comes from years of experience and wisdom gained from poor decisions that we might have made. And like, well, okay, I really shouldn't have fought that battle. So we learn. But graduate students of color in particular or graduate students who are not even graduate students of color, but graduate students who are trying to do innovative work, really need to have thought about who's going to be on this committee. Right? Are they going to be supporters? Are they going to just be naysayers? Like that committee thought process is really important. And, this is your question. What's the question you're asking? How does it connect to theory and method? I mean, it's a simple thing, but it's a complex thing. And so faculty having the time to really shepherd a student through and understand, okay, how is this going to set, if the student wants to be a faculty member, how does this set them up and prepare them? Because now in the academy, you almost have to have published like 3 or 4 articles before you get out there. It's like you trying to hire a tenured faculty member who's a graduate student, right? So it's like, we got to get your work out. I mean, there's just all kinds of, and we had a program at Virginia Tech. We have a program, it's called the Future Faculty Diversity Program. And we use that to recruit faculty of color. And I always have these conversations with faculty of the future faculty, they're graduate students or postdocs. And I'm like, how's your experience been in grad school? And some are like, oh, I had a great mentor and they talked to me about how to prepare for this program. And I thought I was just going to come in my shorts and chill out. And they're like, no, it's an interview. Get your suit and get ready and blah, blah, blah. You know, and so some people are well mentored and some are at, you know, Harvard, Yale, Berkeley, and not well mentored students of color. And they're struggling to get a job because they don't know how to prepare. So I think, you know, it's a tough role and responsibility, but it takes more color to support us. It takes more time to support us often.
Thank you.
Very much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Olga, for asking that question. Is there someone else out there in Zoom land that would like to ask another question? If you guys feel like turning on your cameras and just finishing up these last 10 minutes with a conversation, we'd love to hear your opinions about things. Because this is a space and a place to be heard. And I think it's a perfect example of what Dr. Clarke is talking about. This is a space, because we're talking about something in groups of individuals who've been marginalized, oppressed in many ways throughout the academy and the literature. And any thoughts or comments or questions that you have would be appreciated. And please just kind of jump in there at this point. We have 10 minutes. No need to raise your hand. Thank you.
What I thought I could share, and maybe it'll generate questions or might be a nice way to close out. I thought I could share a little bit about the structure of the book and the format and what the content is. So let me share that and maybe it'll generate a few questions or maybe we'll close it out from that. So I talk about, you know, that I was crying, like I was trying to write this thing and I just reached this breaking point where I couldn't. And then all of a sudden, like over time, this vision and framework came to me. So the work begins with a prologue. And the prologue sets the stage for how a writer undertakes this massive project of unearthing 45 years of journals to tell the story of a journey from Black girlhood to Black womanhood in America. Part one of the prologue begins with a revolutionary libation. And I talk about how my father's from Sierra Leone in West Africa, Freetown. And the first time when my mother and I went to Freetown, he didn't accompany us. My mother and I went, and then my father's sister and his mother took us to a cemetery. And at the cemetery, my grandmother was pouring libation and introducing the ancestors to my mother and I. But I was young, I was in college. I'm like, why are we out here? She's roaming, the cemetery's covered with weeds. She's got some vodka and she's got some food and she's like putting food and pouring libation. And I didn't realize the importance and the reverence of libation. But I talk about that experience at the beginning of the book. And I say, because I now understand the importance of libations, I'm symbolically pouring out libations to two Black women writers, Lorraine Hansberry and Leonida McLean. And both of those women died in their 30s. Leonida McLean committed suicide and Lorraine Hansberry died of cancer. And I talk about Leonida McLean's suicide and this conversation she had with the conversation a writer subsequently had after she died with her former husband and said, should she have cared so much about the world? And the ex-husband said, no, she shouldn't. And I said, yes, she should have. Like, we should care. And so I basically say, because they died, and Lorraine Hansberry, before she died, said she wanted to go back to the South and see what kind of revolutionary she was going to be. She died in the 60s. And I said, I want to pick up their baton and see what kind of revolutionary I can be. So I start with that libation to both of them. Then I have a second part two of the prologue is called Revolutionary Liberation. And I share, as I shared earlier, this metaphor of gardening and how we're trying to unearth parts of ourselves that were buried like seeds. And then I talk about the structure of and framework of the story, that it uses concepts from theater with acts, stages, and scenes. There's 4 acts, and each of the acts has 3 stages of an initiation journey. So within each act, there are 3 to 4 scenes, and they also include wild woman wisdom at the end and questions for reflection. So whoever is reading it has that space for reflecting on their own journey through questions at the end. So it's told in first person, but also in third person with journal excerpts. And it's essentially that my adult self, who I call Black Wild Woman, is sharing her journey from girlhood to womanhood and her mission to take back and reclaim her childhood superpower that I call Black Wild Girl. And that concept of Black Wild Girl and superpower comes from a story that my parents always sort of told me and laughed when they said it. So I was acting womanish. I was like a young girl, 5 years old, and I was acting up, supposedly. And my father said, in this very strong African accent that he never lost, "Who do you think you are?" And I said, "I'm Queen of Sheba." And I was 5 years old. It's like, how does a 5-year-old girl say she's Queen of Sheba? So this queen from the Bible of this ancient, who came and visited Solomon. And so I say, because the world wasn't ready for a queen, that it severed me. So I was separated from my queenhood, childhood self, and I had to undertake this journey to find her. So Act 1 is the burial. And it has these 3 stages: the bargain, the sorrow journey, and the dismemberment. And those are stages from Clarissa Pinkolas Estes's The Handless Maiden. So the bargain, the sorrow journey, and dismemberment. This act lays the foundation for the tensions and challenges in the Black girlhood journey. Navigating the impact of patriarchy and racism as a Black girl born in the late 1960s in the midst of the civil rights movement, the assassination of Martin Luther King, upheavals of social inequality, the challenges of voting, the lynching, school desegregation, and affirmative action. The burden and responsibility for parents raising a Black girl in America in the 1960s and 70s was perilous, fraught with potholes, wrong ways, and dead ends. And it was a road that needed to be navigated with savvy strength and strategy, as well as love, compassion, and tenderness. So that first act just talks about my parents, my mother, who I just talked about, who grew up picking cotton, whose grandmother was enslaved, who was one of 8 children who became a full professor. So it's her journey. And then my father's journey, who was from Freetown, Sierra Leone, immigrated to America, got a PhD in nuclear physics, and subsequently the academy terminated his tenure journey 3 years into his contract. So he became a very bitter, angry Black man who never used his PhD in nuclear physics after 3 years in the academy. So those were my parents, and then I have a brother as well. So Act 1 just sets that framework. Act 1 is called the burial. Act 2 is called roots. And it has 3 stages, stages 4, 5, and 6, called fountains of knowledge, flickers of light, and forces of fate. In this act, Black Wild Woman, like a seed, is undergoing germination, developing roots, being watered, trying to spread her wings in the world through her college adventure. So I talk about my experiences at the University of Iowa. It actually includes experiences where I was raped as a college student, because a lot of women of color experience rape. It's often not talked about or written about. I share that experience. I share about my time at Iowa, my relationships with men, trying to look for love in the world and what that experience looked like. Act 3 is called Weeds, and it has stages 7, 8, and 9, spiritual trials, spiritual questing, and spiritual rights. In this stage, I talk about being married, what it's like to be married, to have children. I had a miscarriage. I share the miscarriage experience I talk about having 2 other children. My husband at the time became addicted to drugs. So I talk about what it's like to be with someone who's an addict and sort of navigating that life while I was working as a lawyer, and then working at Vanderbilt. I also talk about my father dying, what that meant, trying to deal with loss, and then the subsequent death of my mother, and how we have remained fairly close over the years. And then Act 4 is called Liberation. And it has stages 10, 11, and 12. And it's called Black Wild Girl, Black Wild Mother, and Black Wild Womanist. And it's about reclamation, reconciliation, rebirth, reunion, and revolution. I talk about an initiation rite I created for my daughter when she got her period, and trying to be more thoughtful about this rites of womanhood. I talk about watching my mother die and this process of death and dying, and trying to understand that my mother died in our house from cancer, but she also had Alzheimer's. So watching that death and dying process. And then I started having dreams about my parents and talked about the dream world and my questions. So I was writing all this time. It's like, okay, mom is dying today, or I had this dream today. So I share sort of real life, real moment at the time experiences, but then I also have reflections, sort of present day reflections back. Seeing my mother as now an ancestor and a spirit guide. And then the work ends with an epilogue where I talk about how I rediscovered this little girl, this after I came back from the retreat, this Black wild girl. All of a sudden I saw this picture of myself where I was a little girl at the age of 5. And I'm like, why haven't I seen that picture before? So it was just like a revelation. So it was like revolution, like this turning around, and this writing had led to this revelation of that queen self, and the power of writing to create revolution and revelation. So that's the content of the manuscript. And it'll be out probably in April 2024.
Thank you. Final comments, questions before we close out this evening?
Thank you. Hand claps.
Just a question. This seems so life encompassing. Where do you think you might go next after this book?
I'm actually working on 2 other books. I'm working on I've written blog posts for about the last 5 years. So I'm working on recreating a book of essays based on those blog posts, and working with a Latina chief diversity officer on writing about our shared experiences leading DEI work. So it'll be from a Black woman's lens and a Latina lens on how we think about and approach DEI. So those are 2 other projects that I'm working on.
Well, thank you so much. Any other questions? If not, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, everyone. I have put in, we have a survey, or evaluation of Dr. Pratt's presentation this evening. If you would please complete it, because it helps her, just like it helps everyone else. We really would appreciate that. Again, I will put it there again for you to complete. It's very quick, but we like to evaluate all of our presentations here, because this was amazing. And I think people need to give the amazing feedback, and not just feedback when it's negative, because we're so good at that. Again, well, thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Do you want me to stay on, or?
Well, we still have somebody here, but I'll give you a call.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.